Hello and welcome to Community Forum. My name is Roy Cohen and I'll be hosting this show. It's again one of the virtual shows that we have to do from home because of the COVID situation, which we hope will go by one of these days. It's looking better, but I think it's still going to be a while. Our guest today is David Allen Lambert. He's the town historian and vice president of the Stoughton Historical Society. He joined the Historical Society in 1980 at the age of 11. He's authored 4 books on Stoughton history and genealogy and is the chief genealogist for the New England Historic Genealogical Society in Boston. He served as the tribal historian for the Massachusetts Punkapoag Indians of Massachusetts. He is a fellow of the Massachusetts Historical Society and the state historian of the Massachusetts Sons of the American Revolution, and a lifelong Stoughton resident and Stoughton High School graduate. And with that long introduction, David, I welcome you to the show. I have to start off with the first question, and although I think I have a picture of it in the background, you want to explain where the Historical Society is located?
Sure. Well, we're at the old Lucius Clapp Memorial Building, built in 1903, and it's at the corner of Pleasant and Park Streets in Stoughton. If you've been a longtime Stoughton resident, you may have remembered going to the public library here because it was the library from 1903 to 1969 when they built the new one down the street.
Right. There's the question of the day, David. I used to think that there was looked like a railroad track in front of the sign, but I know there's a story behind the story on that one. You want to explain what that is all?
I actually can, and I have a visual. This is a piece of the track.
That looks familiar.
Yeah. So this is the old trolley line that went through Stoughton till the 1930s when it was replaced by the bus. And that section of trolley came from about in front of Olivio's about, I want to say a dozen years ago now. They were doing some road work in the center and they struck all these railroad tracks and they were confused because they thought they took all the tracks up in the 30s. Yeah, apparently they left those ones there. And Joe McCrisky had a batch of them cut up so we could have them in front of the Historical Society. And I got one of the nubs on the end. It makes a great doorstop, but don't drop it on your foot. And but yeah, the old railway line, the electric railway, would go from Mattapan right down to Glen Echo. In fact, my grandmother, who didn't even move to Stoughton until the 1950s, when she lived in Dorchester back in the 1900s, would come out to Glen Echo because it was the place to be.
And still is, I would imagine.
Yeah, it is, and I'm so glad the town has it back, and we're moving forward with that for the community.
So when did the trains no longer run into Stoughton?
Well, the electric railway stopped, I want to say about 1934, 35. That's when they brought in the bus. There's a lot of talk actually in the Stoughton Enthusiast page on Facebook about the railway. And one of the comments was a horse-drawn railway. I'm like, no, it was always electric. But in any event, it's a great little piece of Stoughton's past. We have some pictures of what the railway cars look like, and I own a few myself. In fact, Howie Hansen, my longtime friend and my mentor, made a postcard up on one of his runs for Moderator that had the old Glen Echo trolley on it.
That's interesting. How is Howie doing, by the way?
He's doing pretty well, I understand. He's over in the Life Center in West Bridgewater. As many of you know, Howie a couple of years ago now has had a major stroke, and it's left him pretty incapacitated, but he still can communicate on some levels, and unfortunately because of COVID we can't go and visit him. So the other day somebody had taken a picture of him there and he looked pretty happy. I missed my long chats with him because nothing was brevis when you talk to Howie.
No, that's for sure. That's
if you wanted a quick answer, you got the hour answer.
Yeah. That's Howie for you. I believe his father, Orrin, was the same way.
Oh, gosh, yes.
Well,
I used to love calling up and calling for Howie at the house on Pleasant Street, and his mother, Ruth, would answer. She'd go, hold on, I'll call my boy. He's out in the store.
Yeah.
And she would give me all the gossip up in North Stoughton. She'd tell me, you know what this one was doing the other day? It's just like, sitting in her kitchen, hearing the stories. I'd come over there for Sunday afternoon dinner, occasionally when I was working with Howie on a project. And it was like stepping back into the past. They're a great family. I miss Orr and Ruth, and of course, miss seeing Howie on a regular basis.
I miss her chocolate chip cookies.
Oh, yes, I remember those cookies. Yes. She was truly Stoughton's grandma for a lot of us.
Right. Well, they were quite the unique family, and I'm sorry that Howie has suffered the stroke, and it doesn't appear as though he's coming back from it at all.
No, and it's sad, Roy, because he was truly the encyclopedia of Stoughton knowledge. I mean, he had so much that he retained, and it must be so frustrating because I think he remembers all of it. It's just he just cannot communicate it, sadly, which is a crime in itself. It's very sad.
Well, from what I can see, it's in good hands at this point with you,
I
sir.
try. Thank you, sir.
Okay, and I see you've supplied us with several pictures, and I was kind of wondering what a lot of them were about when they were nothing but cemeteries, but I guess there's stories to be told about those also.
Yeah, yeah.
So why don't we see if we can get one of them up and running here?
Sure.
Just let me, it's tough being a one-man show here. Here we go. This is our first picture, and you go ahead, David.
Okay, well, this you may remember seeing if you were heading up 138 past Canton, heading towards the Blue Hills. It used to be on the left-hand side. I think the sign broke off, or hopefully it's been preserved someplace and somebody didn't steal it. These are the signs, Roy, that were put around the Commonwealth during the tercentenary back in 1930 for the 300th. As we approach the 400th of Mass Bay Colony, hopefully some of these will get restored or even put back in. So the Ponkapog Plantation was 6,000 acres set aside by Reverend John Elliott, who was a preacher over in Roxbury. And he basically had the petitioned the town of Dorchester to set aside 6,000 acres, everything is sort of south of the Blue Hills, or Ponkapog Pond, Ponkapog golf courses, and a surrounding area that headed right into what is North Stoughton. If you go down Glen Echo Boulevard, you can find the marker that the Stoughton Historical Society put in the southeast corner. So the Ponkapog Indians, a lot of people hear about the Wampanoag, and their history is very important and rich, but where we live was the Massachusetts Indians, hence where the state got its name. A lot of people don't realize that, and it's Algonquin. It means people of the Great Hill, and in this case, the Great Hills, the Blue Hills. So the Ponkapog Indians were Christianized Indians and had essentially a praying Indian village town, or plantation, as they called them.
You have it listed as Punkapog. Is there? I thought that was a misspelling, but it's not.
There's a couple of different variations of it. The modern Massachusetts Tribal Council of the Ponkapog Indians used the Punkapog, and they still are around. The tribe is not extinct, as some people had thought. They basically, there's a variety of different spellings, and because it's Algonquin, there was no written language per se until John Eliot translated the Bible, and then they kind of did a loose translation from there. So I've seen it about 5 or 6 different spellings.
Yeah. All right, the next slide. Who was this gentleman?
Oh, that happy guy was Lieutenant Governor and Chief Justice William Stoughton, who was born in 1633 and died in 1701. He's infamously known as the judge of the Salem witchcraft trials. And actually, my ancestor was brought to trial, and he was the judge sitting at that point in time. Luckily, my ancestor wasn't hanged. So the story about Stoughton is that his father, Israel Stoughton, owned a lot of land, Roy. And if you take the commuter rail and you're going from Canton Junction up to Route 128, you go through a lot of wetland. That was originally Stoughton Meadows, and because of the iron ore. So it's a smart man to buy that, because that iron ore was used to make cannons and other things years ago. And when Stoughton died in 1701, he was the acting lieutenant governor. And the case of Lieutenant Governor Stoughton is the town of Stoughton was named in his honor. And that was 25 years later in 1726. So we got our name.
Any of his relatives still around?
Never married. He was an eternal bachelor. So a lot of people come and say, "Oh, I'm a descendant from William Stoughton." I said, "Well, you're going to need a DNA test for that, because he had, nor was he ever married."
So they have to dig him up to take a test of him first.
Oh, yeah. I'm sure there were a lot of people that don't think too highly of him with the all the people that were hanged during the witchcraft trials in 1692.
Is there a marker, or where is he buried?
He's buried in the Dorchester Cemetery, and he had a tomb that he was buried in that was replaced in the 1820s by Harvard University, and it has a very ornate, very, I don't know, Corinthian Roman sides. It swoops down, all made out of marble. I've never visited it because it's one of the old Boston cemeteries that's locked now because of vandalism and just, you know, fear of people going in and destroying things. But someday I want to see it, see what the state of its condition is now.
I have to go in there with a camera and do another show.
Yeah.
All right, we have our next one. It's some kind of a map of Norfolk County, I guess it is.
Right, exactly. So this map of Norfolk County kind of talks a little bit about what we have, the original shape of Stoughton. So on here, there's the tip of the middle triangle, that's Canton. And that top corner is where we meet up with Milton. And that went down in that kind of that slope that kind of goes, say, from 12 o'clock to 5 o'clock, if you will. And then it goes down to the Plymouth Colony line. And that went all the way over to Sharon, to the Foxborough line, and then swoop back up. So it was sort of like a triangle like that. And the town of Stoughton divided up a lot. In fact, it was much bigger. What's left is sort of that little lower area right below the green part that is Canton. In 1740, the second parish of Stoughton was formed, and that became Sharon. And then Stoughton, our modern town, didn't come about as the third parish until 1744. And these were parishes by churches, Roy. So they would have a parish church. And what would happen then is that Sharon wanted to become its own town. So the second precinct was then transferred to what we were. We were the third. The third disappeared. We became the second. In 1797, the original first parish decided it wanted to separate, and it chose the name Canton in relation to thinking that you could drill a hole through the earth, you come out in Canton, China. Truth is, you come out somewhere in the Pacific. And then, of course, our town had one more division from it. I mean, there's smaller parts that broke off, but the most major part was East Stoughton, which is now the town of Avon since 1888.
It's a shame we lost all those pieces. We could have been the biggest town in Massachusetts.
Exactly.
Framingham, which was until they turned into a city.
That's true. That's true. Yeah, now Stoughton would be huge. And well, that is the marker on West Street, Roy. That is the Isaac Stearns House monument that was put there by the Stoughton Historical Society in April of 1899 on Patriots Day. And we rededicated it 100 years later. Howie, myself, and the late Bob Benson went there and rededicated. And then in recent years, on the 300th anniversary of when Isaac Stearns built the house in 1716, so back in 2016, we had a great celebration. The police in Stoughton were there. They blocked off the road. We had about, I don't know, 30 people or so, and we were all wearing old-fashioned bowlers, and that was a great time. So Isaac Stearns' house was the first house in modern-day Stoughton. Even though if you go to Sharon and Canton, there were earlier buildings. In fact, the earliest one, if you go down South Main Street in Sharon, and you go to where Shaw's Plaza is, that's where Billings Tavern was, and that's on the old Kings Highway Road, and that was built in the 1600s. The house is long since gone, though.
Right. Okay. Now we've entered into some pictures of cemeteries, and I guess this was on Pearl Street.
That is the old Pearl Street Cemetery, and in the background you can see that dark area. It's actually the tombs where the ministers of the Congregational Universalist Church. So our first minister in this part of town, Reverend Jedediah Adams, who was cousin of John Adams, our president, is buried with his family, and another minister, Reverend Edward Richmond. So most of these gravestones, the earliest date back to 1737, and that's for the Estey family. It's up right up on the rise, kind of out of the picture. And that is a monument that was put there by Edward Estey for his children. About 3 or 4 of them died within a month's time, we believe, from smallpox. The land itself was given by an early town settler, Captain George Talbot of Dorchester, who had settled in our part of Stoughton. And it was in his house that the first town meeting in Stoughton occurred in 1727.
The name Talbot seems to be a common name in the town.
Oh, yeah, it's an old town name. I think there's still some Talbot descendants kicking around today in Stoughton.
Okay, the next one we have is here we go. Is it,
Okay, yeah, that's down in my neck of the woods. That's
right,
the Dry Pond Cemetery.
are you showing that now?
Yeah, I can see it. Yep. So the Dry Pond Cemetery is on Plain Street and Bay Road, and that was earliest gravestone there is Zachariah Lyon, who died in 1749. But we believe it probably dates back to the 1730s, and it's probably where Isaac Stearns and his family perhaps are buried, either that or Pearl Street. It has a lot of early gravestones, including an African American who was in the Revolutionary War. There is also Lucius Clapp is buried there. Myron Gilbert, who did all the quarries and got the granite out that helped build the Stoughton train station, as well as numerous Revolutionary War, Civil War, War of 1812, Spanish American War, World War I, World War II, right down to modern veterans, because they expanded the cemetery some years ago, and it's still being used today.
Okay. We have another one here. This one.
Oh, that's the Methodist Meeting House Cemetery, and that's right located on Central Street, right up by kind of by the Chemung Hill School. It's across from like 1857 Central Street, and next to Palilio's Garden Center. So this little cemetery cast away in the background is one of those type of cemeteries you kind of blink and miss it. It was set up for the members of the Methodist Church, and the Methodist Church stood in that sort of that strip mall that was there until about 1987 when it was taken down. It was a residence by then. But there's a lot of gravestones in there. The sad one is one memorial for a young man in the 1830s who was boating out on Lake Massapog, and the boat tipped over and he drowned.
Oh, what a shame. Okay, let's see what we have here. This one is
Okay, yeah, that's the Marshall Bird Cemetery, probably the smallest, one of the smallest cemeteries in Stoughton. If you go down 138 and past what used to be Duncan Fleming's house, Gene Fleming's childhood home, is a cemetery for Benjamin Marshall, who built the house. The house is gone now, but he was a Revolutionary War soldier. His picture is sort of in the foreground with the flag, and the rest of his family, and it's intermarried with his children, grandchildren, and also families of Henry Bird, who lived in that part of Stoughton on Washington Street. And it's a small little cemetery, private family cemetery that is now cared for by the town of Stoughton.
oh, interesting. The Fleming house, I believe, is no longer there. They were, it was going to become a church, I think, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was going to be a church. One of the churches in Canton had purchased the property, and now it's sort of just kind of gone back to nature.
Shame. Okay, here we go.
Okay, now that is the Porter Street Cemetery, and that is up on the Porter Family Cemetery on South Street in Stoughton, and that was the earliest gravestone in there is from 1808, and that's for the Porter family. And if you go down South Street on the left, and we'll see an image shortly of the Pride of Brockton Cemetery, and it abuts it. The Pride of Brockton is the Jewish cemetery in Stoughton that was started back in 1901. So this cemetery is just right next to it. And again, one of those small ones that if you blink, you miss it. You went by the old Immaculate, the Our Lady of the Rosary Church on Park Street, took that right there, South Street, and go all the way down into almost Avon, and you'd see it.
Right. Okay. You mentioned the Pride of Brockton. Here we go. A lot of buttons to push here when you're a one-man show.
Exactly.
There you go.
So that's the old gate. It's been removed now, but that is the sign for the Pride of Brockton Lodge Cemetery. And this cemetery was started by a Brockton Jewish temple that was, or synagogue rather, that was concerned with having a cemetery locally, because a lot of the Jewish residents of Brockton at that time were going all the way into Boston to West Roxbury to the Baker Street cemeteries, where a lot of the Jewish cemeteries are. And this cemetery is still active. It's getting quite full, but it goes in and then it wraps around to the right, almost kind of behind the old Porter Street Cemetery. But it's quite a nice cemetery, and very amazing to see all the history, seeing some of the inscriptions there.
So who maintains that?
That's That cemetery is not maintained by the town. It's maintained by the Jewish Cemetery Association in Massachusetts. They own a variety of cemeteries, and I believe that is one of them that is on their list.
Uh-huh. Okay, this one is more within our community. I'm going to make some adjustments here. Here we go. Maplewood.
Yep.
Here we go.
So that's Maplewood Cemetery up in North Stoughton. And luckily they fixed that sign, but it got low bridged by a truck that thought that it could go in there and tore it right off. It's across from the old Stoughton Armory. And this cemetery was started back in 1840. And it has a lot of burials for families that lived in the north part of Stoughton. Because you got to remember, before that time, Holy Sepulchre, the Catholic cemetery, hadn't been started, and Evergreen Cemetery hadn't been started yet. So you had Pearl Street Cemetery, which is getting pretty full by that point in time, or you had a lot of small family cemeteries. So this was a wise investment, and it is a privately run cemetery to this day and still active. There are some members of the Ponkapog Indians, Roy, that are actually buried there. One of the last chiefs of the early 1900s, Jeremiah Bancroft. Now, of course, the tribe's active now, but when he died in 1914, people thought that was the last of the tribe.
But it's still active now?
It is still very active with hundreds of members.
Okay, that's when, here we go. Evergreen. This one is, where's the Evergreen?
If you stand at Town Spa and you turn completely around, you can't miss it. And that's on Washington Street and Gay Streets. The cemetery was started in 1853. And what they did, Roy, early on is they actually went into Pearl Street Cemetery. And a lot of the families decided this new garden cemetery had so much more appeal. So a lot of the tombs and some of the burials were dug out of Pearl Street and moved over here. So when you walk around the cemetery, even though the cemetery is from 1853, you'll find gravestones that date back. In fact, the earliest is for a baby who died in 1799 that's buried in one of the family plots. So it's a beautiful cemetery, great to walk around. Don't bring your dog. I'm on the Evergreen Cemetery board of trustees, and it's one of those ones that I could just walk around, and reading the gravestones is almost like a history lesson. I photographed thousands upon thousands of gravestones here and in other cemeteries. So when we get weather like we get this week coming up, I don't have to go out with a snow shovel and try to find it for someone who's doing genealogy. The best stone, I don't know if you've seen it, Roy, the one that's shaped like a tent that's in there. It's a granite A-frame tent, and that's for Marcus Porter, who was a Civil War veteran in Stoughton. He grew up in the house that stood right where Town Hall is now. Robert Porter, his father, sold it, and they tore the house. Well, actually, they moved the house, and it's Town Hall is where the Porters lived.
Right.
Hence Porter Street.
Is there somebody has anybody ever gone through the cemeteries and kind of put a little booklet together about what's going on in there?
Well, you know, it's funny. Dory Frankel did a little survey that was done back in the 80s. But what a lot of people use, Roy, is Find a Grave. It's a free website, and it has millions of gravestones on it. So what I have actually done, so I can actually go in and pick Evergreen Cemetery, put in a name, and find it. Because, I mean, I'm not trying to plug my book, but to show you why I like cemeteries. I've written 3 editions of this. It's called The Guide to Massachusetts Cemeteries. And it lists where all the cemeteries are in the state. So I decided, well, I make something like that, maybe people will start photographing and going out and documenting, because a lot of the old marble gravestones, what's happening is they were beautiful, like marble in your home. You get elements from New England, and the stone is what's called sugaring. It's basically sanding off. So the lower epitaphs or biblical verses are on it are almost impossible to read. And some of the stones now that I read 30 years ago, you can't really read them anymore. So it's glad I got some of them down.
Yeah. Okay, here's another one.
Oh, Holy Sepulchre Cemetery. That's another one of the ones that's confusing. So this is essentially the Irish Catholic cemetery for Stoughton. And of course, there are other members of the Catholic faith that are buried there now. It wasn't just all Irish after a while. And it was originally opened in 1865, right around the time of the Civil War, at the end of the Civil War. But the burials there, again, are older. So they're old gravestones from the 1840s. What happened? All of the Stoughton Catholics were buried over in Randolph. And when I went over there and looked at their ledger books, it showed in 1865 wagon after wagon of burials being removed and brought to Stoughton.
I know this sounds kind of stupid, but I'm sitting here and I keep having flashbacks to the old TV, and the question of the day was, who was buried in Grant's tomb?
And that tomb right there has never been a tomb. It's a receiving tomb. So in the wintertime, when it got too cold to break the ground to bury somebody before power tools,
Yeah.
they would put the caskets in there. Now I think it just holds probably tools. There's another one that's over at Evergreen. If you go in, it's kind of like into the side of a hill. That was the old receiving tomb. And the last time I heard, the only resident of that is a raccoon on every so often.
Really?
Yeah.
All right, what have we got here? Okay, David, take it away.
Okay. Now this, if you go on School Street, and if you, any townies here, remember where Bob DiMatteo from Bob's Market lived, right there is where the Poor Farm Cemetery is. And it's in the woods, and it's marked off by 6 granite posts. My good friend Heather Everett McGinley and I went in there a number of years ago, and we kind of cleaned it up. It probably needs a good cleaning again. But I'd like to see the town put a fence and a marker in there indicating it's a cemetery. Now, in my research, the only person I can find that was buried there, sadly, in the 1890s, a baby had died and was left on the side of the road, and she, or I think it was a girl, was buried in that cemetery. For the most part, the paupers of Stoughton were buried either in the back of Pearl Street Cemetery in the back left-hand corner, or there were lots set up at Evergreen that were purchased by the town. So this, even though it was set up for Poor Farm Cemetery, unless somebody uses ground penetrating radar to detect the grave shafts, I'm not sure many people are actually buried there.
I don't see any stones in this picture.
No, and in most pauper cemeteries where you don't find gravestones, they would, if best, they would have had a wooden marker up. And of course, you know, after 100 years, it's probably gone. I did talk to some old timers like Johnny Stiles and Ken Healy back in the early 80s. And when they were kids, they'd go back there and they said there were no stones there either.
Yeah. Do you think there should be a effort to clean this?
I'd like to. It's owned by the town. I would love to see. I mean, I would even volunteer to help with a cleanup crew, but we need somebody that could volunteer, again, with the town's permission, with a chainsaw, clean the trees that are, I mean, the smaller ones that are kind of growing in the confines of it. And then, you know, maybe everybody pitch in a little bit and we can have a stone erected. I just don't want to see somebody accidentally 100 years from now think it's nothing and then bulldoze it.
Yeah, that would not be good.
Right.
All right, and then this one looks like the last photo.
Okay.
And this one's some kind of a prominent individual.
You know who he is his name is Ellis Drake, and he was born in Stoughton, 1839. He lived up on West Street on the house that would have stood right where, actually the house is still kind of there, where Camp Academy, where Camp Westwoods is, that gray house that's sort of like the administration building. That was his family home. Ellis's father was a shoemaker, like many people in Stoughton. And if you ever looked at the sole of the leather from a shoe, it kind of wraps around like the cover of a baseball, the shape, right? So if you take 2 of those soles and put them together, young Ellis realized that he could stitch it around the ball that they were using to play. And he created, probably in the 1840s, a baseball cover, which is similar to the modern cover now. Now, here's the story. Apparently the Spaldings or somebody in Boston saw it, stole the idea, and patented it themselves. Ellis unfortunately never thought to patent his idea, and it was lost to history until about the early 1900s when somebody was interviewing him. He had invented numerous things and has a variety of different patents that are searchable on Google now, but he didn't patent the baseball. And the interesting thing is there's an article and it talks about him inventing the baseball cover. He's buried at Dry Pond Cemetery. Unfortunately, his gravestone has been lost to time. We know that where the family plot is, but his individual burial spot is lost. So he is mentioned in the records and on a display at the Baseball Hall of Fame in Cooperstown, New York.
All right, we've run out of photos. How about some stories about the Historical Society? if somebody wanted to become a member of the society, what do they have to do?
We'd love to have you become a member. I have been involved since 1980 when I was a kid, and a lot of townies and people that are just interested in town history, or maybe your family came from Stoughton and you live elsewhere now. It's great. You can go to the website, stoughtonhistory.com, and you can find out about membership there. You can call the phone number 781-344-5456. And that is another way. You can also go on to the Facebook group for the Stoughton Historical Society. And also I want to plug two others. My good friend John Karabastos has a wonderful page called the Stoughton Scrapbook. And I maintain one called the Stoughton Time Machine, which was the name of my TV show on our cable network a few years back. So both John and I post a lot of pictures and postcards and great history on Stoughton, because just so much there to give out. But the Historical Society is open on Monday afternoons still, and also Thursday evenings. But give a call ahead to make sure they're there, and they can give you a great tour, and you can look at Stoughton's past. It's great.
That sounds like something that would be very interesting to try. I guess I'll have to get in there one of these days. I know I talk about it a lot, but I've never been in there, and I think I will have to go in.
You let me know, and I'll give you the 10-cent tour.
That's a good reason to go in itself. How about telling me about some of the older houses in Stoughton?
Oh, yeah, sure.
Is there a list of those? And
yeah, we have a great list of the properties. In fact, stoughtonhistory.com has a page that I created. I built the website and gave it to the Historical Society of the oldest structures. Now, we've lost a few over the years, and Howie Hanson and I, about 25 years ago, started to investigate the David Gay house that was on Island Street. And actually, it's still partly there, Roy. It's kind of built into a more modern structure. Part of it, we think, dates back to 1725, which would make it the oldest standing structure in Stoughton. But back in the 250th of Stoughton, back in 1976, they started to plaque the old houses. And it was any house that was built in Stoughton within the first 100 years, so built before 1826. And the oldest one standing now that is confirmed is the Consider Atherton House on Pratt's Court. It dates back to 1740. In recent years, you may have remembered a little gray house that sat right on the road on Sumner Street heading to the old Goddard Hospital. And that was the Thomas Glover House. He was an officer in the French and Indian War. And unfortunately, his house has been lost. The landowner tried to work with the town. We tried to get it, but it was too far gone to do anything with it, and it's gone now.
The house was too far gone?
Yeah, there was a hole in the roof about the size of a refrigerator that had fallen through, and because of that, it caused some decay. I mean, my personal estimate, somebody could have probably moved it and restored it, but the cost involved in that would have been tremendous. I wish there was a place in Stoughton, kind of like our own version of Sturbridge Village, that these old buildings could have been salvaged and moved to for people to tour and see. Kind of like the Cape and Reynolds house up there on North Stoughton on Pleasant and Pine Street. These are valuable pieces of history, and once they're gone forever.
What's the story with the Cape and Reynolds house? Is that something that is habitable?
I think that there are going to be a lot of things that have to be abated inside. I don't know what the situation on lead paint and whatnot. It used to be inhabited by the Conservation Commissioner's family. A family member had it. And then the town back in 1995 was going to tear it down. So at the edge, I guess I can say it now because Howie is no longer the moderator. He was really concerned, as I was, about getting a petition to town. So what I did is I started on one end of Pleasant Street and I knocked on every door all the way up to North Stoughton. And I got a petition, went before the town, and I said, listen, you can't tear this down. There was $50,000 set into a trust to save this building. You tell me where that money is, and then I'll say that the town and all these signers to save the house will want to have that answer first. Nobody could figure out what happened to the money that was set inside for the trust for the house. And now the Friends of the Cape and Reynolds organization I helped found back in 1995, it's still very active today. Richard Terry in Stoughton has been very involved and is really sort of one of the leaders in the group. And they are still very active. They have done lots of things to try to maintain and keep the building, integrity there. They've had it painted a number of times and all that. But it's a great old house. Then the only part of that is really the the L to the right-hand side of it is from the 1750s, and it was part of the Edward Capen home. But the people who live in town would probably remember Frank and Bertha Reynolds. They were both single. They were siblings, and they lived in that house from the time they were children right up until the 1970s when they both died.
Which house was that?
The Capen Reynolds house right there on Plain
Oh,
Street. They were the last family of the generation that actually lived there. That again, it was occupied by people in the Conservation Commission's family the last time I recall, and that would have been in the early 1990s that anybody actually lived there.
Another house I'm thinking of is the Mary Baker house, I think it's called, the one that's on
Yeah.
Central Street.
Yeah, so Mary Baker Eddy in the late 1860s lived there. That was the house of Alanson Wentworth, and his family were rented a room to her. The interesting thing about that house, if you go upstairs, they could pull back the carpet. Apparently, accidentally, Mary started a fire out of the fireplace, and it got onto the floor. But her room is still there, and of course, she is the founder of the Christian Scientist movement, and the church has many of the houses. It's owned by the Longyear Foundation. So you can find a lot of the different residences she lived in are still preserved. A beautiful example of a 19th century home that if she hadn't lived there for a short amount of time, Roy, there'd probably be a gas station there now.
Oh, that's glad it's still there.
Yeah.
Is that something that they have tours in that house?
They do. I mean, obviously with COVID, there's probably nothing going on now, but who knows? But I have gone on a tour there a couple of times over the years, and it doesn't take very long. It's a quaint little home.
Sure. You know, when you mentioned that house on Sumner Street that they tore down, I saw that happening, and I really felt it was a darn shame that house, which looked like it was in pretty good shape. Of course, I didn't see the inside.
Well, the inside, Roy, the floorboards were great. Chestnut grows is a pretty scrubby little thing now. If you find chestnut trees growing, they're usually the old growth chestnut that probably was there from the 1600s when that house was constructed. The floorboards were this wide. And the Historical Commission, even though we couldn't save it, we worked to see certain elements of the house removed, and we have pieces at the Historical Society now. And so part of it kind of lives on. I actually owned the closet door from Major Thomas Glover's bedroom, which has about 3 or 4 different markings where there were hinges put on it. And typical style of New England was reused. And even though the house dates to 1740, the door, I had an expert on doors from Sturbridge Village look at it, and it dates to probably about 1705 to 1715. So it was reused from another, maybe an earlier Stoughton structure, or maybe moved from some other town. But I love having it because it's a piece of that history, and that will also go to the Historical Society with a lot of my other memorabilia.
What do you do with the door?
What do you do with the door? Well, it's in my garage now, propped up against the wall. And I suppose with the idea of the Historical Society, you know, it's something that we could put up as a display or something, you know, make a frame for it and somebody could kind of walk through it or something like that. I mean, since the house isn't there, it allows you to save an element. The other thing that we salvaged, that house was made out of a lot of the beams were all joined together, and they were marked with Roman numerals, where they would lay them out on the ground, mark them, cut them, and then they would raise them up and join them together. So a house joiner or a house wright would pin them in together. So they're long pieces of cedar, or in some cases maple pins that would be hammered in to hold the wood, and then the wood would swell, and that would hold the house together better than nails.
Sure. Good construction.
Yeah.
I remember my dad was a teacher of woodworking in Rhode Island for many years, and I would love to see how he put furniture together without using nails. They had the corners were, I forget what they call them. I think dadu joints or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
It was an interesting way of seeing. You could tell when you're going out to buy furniture to see if the things were nailed together or they were put together with those joints that I was talking about.
Mm-hmm.
The other question I want to ask you is there's some old houses. Is there anything that could be done to prevent the old houses that are up from being destroyed? Like can we move them? Like the American Legion, I think it's on Central Street, was originally up on the corner of Plain Street, and that's when the town spa bought the property, and they moved that house Can they do things like that with the old houses rather than tear them down?
I mean, the idea is where would you move it to? That's a good point. So Cal Daria's house, Cal, who had Cal's restaurant before Town Spa was built there, his house has moved further down on Plain Street, and they just upped and moved it. They did move a lot of houses. In fact, we have pictures from years ago where they would put them on oxen and move them through the town and whatnot. In fact, one of the houses that stood where Honeydew Donut is now, one of the old Swan homes from the, gosh, about the 1820s, is further up on Park Street. So they did it back then. Now it's a matter of having to take down wires and then, because they're the clearances and whatnot, but they can be done. The problem is where you put it, and a lot of people want modern homes. They don't want a house that may have, dry rot or, potential problems. It's a matter of salvaging it and maybe restoring it there. The Historical Commission, which I serve on, is very, very pushed forward to try to help people, maintain or save these houses. And, there are grants available for people to look into if you're going to restore your home. The thing with the Historical Commission is that we can put a demolition delay bylaw that we have enforced to maybe work with a homeowner to try to seek out alternatives so it won't get destroyed, especially in these older homes. As we had a delay for a while on that house, on the Glover House on Sumner Street. We worked with the town to try to get it preserved and moved and whatnot. It just didn't happen. The other idea is that if we're going to lose these properties that are being torn down, we now have the capability to photograph and measure and take all sorts of images. So that way we have some of a virtual version of what it looks like, even when we don't have the original anymore. I wish they would just all stay.
It's not the same.
Yeah, definitely not the same. So, I mean, the Historical Commission definitely wants to work with people that buy an old house to see what we can do to kind of make sure it isn't completely demolished inside and lost all the old integrity, because it is a valuable piece of the community's history.
How many old houses are there in Stoughton?
Well, I guess it all depends if you think of what you consider old. So within the first part of Stoughton's history, there was that inventory that was done in 1976. Unfortunately, we've lost a number of those homes, well over a dozen I can think of that are gone. So I would say from the 1700s, we're probably looking at, I'm going to guess here, Roy, about 20, 25 homes still in Stoughton from that time frame. And from the 1800s, we have hundreds of them. It's just a matter of, when we do the new plaques, I'd like to see plaques done for Stoughton homes for the first 200 years that go until 1926 and make them available. That's my hope when we have the 300, that people can apply for a plaque, because a lot of the older homes, we know who built them. There was a historian in Stoughton, William Capon, and he drew out on old butcher block paper who owned the house in 1936, who's on the 1876 map, is the house there in 1854, and did all these histories of all these original homes, and it's invaluable now. In fact, there's all sorts of different things on there. On Morton Street, if you go down to where it intersects with Brock, a couple of houses before it, there's a little gray house right there. That's the first fire station in Stoughton from the 1850s. And it was moved down Wyman Street to that part of Morton where it still stands today. And it's now a home, but it was originally our first firehouse.
Do we have any fire trucks in that? I know Joe McCrisky has an old one that he drives around.
Oh yeah, the Historical Society owns that. Joe is the caretaker and the driver of it. That was given to us a number of years ago, and that's the old 1928 Maxim fire truck,
right,
for Stoughton. And yeah, it's a great old one. We actually have approved through the Historical Commission funds to help restore it.
That's nice. It looked pretty good with Joe driving it.
Yeah. He just needs one of those old-fashioned fire hats on his head.
Well, I'll have to look for one of those. I also I noticed for some reason these older houses. There's a couple of them that I've been in. One is on Pearl Street near the high school. The Peeler family used to own it. Al, I forget. I think it was Alan Peeler. I remember going in the house and I was amazed by the staircase that it was so small. You had to be much shorter than most of us are these days to be able to go up and down the stairs.
That was the case in the Glover house too, is that the stairs weren't even like that wide. Like I'm like how my heel was sticking out almost at the end when I was going up like the attic stairs into the
Yeah,
house. I mean, obviously individuals, I mean, not everybody, but historians have found that, people were much shorter back then because of diet. Um, and I think that, obviously we're eating more healthier. Well, even though we have fast food, uh, we're getting more generations that are a little bit taller, and hopefully more healthier. And
I hope so.
so 19th century and 18th century people were not a basketball player size, but I'm sure there were exceptions.
No dunking of the basketball back in those days.
No, James Naismith from
Yeah.
Springfield hadn't invented it yet, probably.
Another old house that I was in is up on Plain Street across from that pond, the White House there. I think it's white or gray.
Oh, yep, yep, the Holmes
Remember
house.
the same type of thing there with very small staircases to go upstairs.
Yeah, it's a beautiful old home. The Abel Farrington owned it, and then before that, it was a Holmes property, and it dates to the 1750s. In fact, the man who built that was actually a soldier who marched on Lexington and conquered.
Hmm. You mentioned the 300th, which was one of my questions that I was going to pose to you. Um, when are we going to celebrate the 300th anniversary of our founding?
Well, let's see. Well, our town was officially incorporated on the 22nd of December, 1726. So if you remember back when we did the 275th, we celebrated it sort of the course of the year when it would have been 275 years. Technically, the year only had 9 days at that point. So most of our celebration would technically be 1727, but I'm sure that in 2026 will be a kickoff, and hopefully things are so much better that we can have parades and tours and things like that, and lectures and things for kids to do, to commemorate our 300th anniversary.
Is there,
I'm
is there,
looking forward to being part of it.
is there a committee?
There was Bob Reagan started a committee. I have told him that when it starts to meet on a regular basis, that I would like to be part of it. I'm not sure who the other members of the committee are, but I told him that when it got moving forward, I would glad to sit on it and help out.
You'll have to let us know so we can start to publicize it on the show.
Absolutely, absolutely. Definitely. And hopefully when we do that, we can sit in the studio with you.
That'll be nice. I forget what people look like to shake hands with them. And
Exactly. You only look at people from here up,
yeah,
Uh,
I just find it interesting to be able to do it this way, but I wish I had someone else with me to assist me in some of the switching going on. Yours and the one I just completed with the Franklin Park Zoo, those are the two most involved shows that I've been part of. A lot of switching, a lot of buttons to push, and to do that plus carry on a conversation, it takes a lot out of you. I'll have to take a nap after this one.
Well, it's been years since I've been on your show, so I was flattered when you asked me if I can ever come back again to talk more about history or something that's going on that has a history spin in the town. I'm delighted to be back.
Well, you tell me when you're ready, and I'll fill in the blank spots. Right now, we're looking at late February for openings. We've got
Okay.
shows between now and then, and I assume that with the political season coming up, we'll be having some of the candidates coming on. But is there anything we might have missed with you? We have a couple more minutes here.
Yeah, I mean, I guess one of the things I try to tell people is that, you obviously can go to the Historical Society and learn. I'm honored to have written a few books on Stoughton. You can find them through Amazon. They're published by Arcadia Publishing. One of them was the history of Stoughton. They're all illustrated. And one of them has a train station on the cover. And another one is postcards of Stoughton. I have an extensive personal postcard collection because I used to go to the flea markets and buy them. I own about 700 different postcards of the town of Stoughton, starting in 1903 forward, including political ones. And then the other book was done with my daughter. My daughter, Brenda Lambert, graduated Stoughton High in 2014. And for her graduation, the year previous, we had worked on a book. So my daughter got to be an author when she graduated Stoughton High. And now she's assistant, let me rephrase that, substitute teacher over at the Easton Public School Systems, and I'm very proud of her. The other book I did was transcribed all the vital records of Stoughton, all the births, marriages, and deaths verbatim, how they were from 1726 right down to 1850, because about that time the state started recording vitals. And that was published by the Mayflower Society. But the Stoughton Historical Society and the Stoughton Public Library, and also if you know Pam Carr Store, the
Sure. Across the-
right on Pearl Street,
Yeah.
that store across from the town hall has the books too on occasion, and some great Stoughton history stuff too.
I think if you can assemble them, we can do a show on that. I'd love to have you show us the various postcards, and just like we did with the cemeteries and today, but that would be a lot more pleasant.
Yeah, I can definitely do that. I get scans of everything. So
Excellent.
when you want to do it, I can give you the penny postcard tour of town.
Oh yeah, penny postcards. I remember.
Which is what is right behind me is actually a penny postcard.
What, the picture?
Yep, exactly.
That's nice. Okay, sir.
All right.
I think that we've covered just about everything we intended to cover today. I want to thank you for being a gentleman, and a pleasant time with you. Look forward to the next time.
Excellent. And if anybody wants to talk about genealogy, American Ancestors, where I work, we are AmericanAncestors.org. Come in and check us out for genealogy. So another thing other than Stoughton.
Where are they located?
We are located at 101 Newbury Street in Boston, Massachusetts, and we started back in 1845, and we can be found at AmericanAncestors.org.
Do you work there these days, or are you working?
I do, but now I'm doing it virtually. So, yeah.
Well, David Lambert.
Well, it's
a real pleasure,
Mr. Cohen.
I thank you very much for your time, and this is Roy Cohen. I hope you enjoyed the show, and we look forward to having you watching our next show. Thanks. See you later.
Take care.